Gentlemen, let's broaden our minds.
Here you're a movie based on a comic book, but you're trying to give it a little bit more psychological structure, base to it, without going too far. We went in with a firm idea of what we wanted to do, but then, in terms of movement, in terms of, tones and all, there's a lot of just discussions and really just trying things.
Tim Burton isn't a director that I talk about a lot on this channel, but I cannot understate how important this man was to my childhood. I would say Tim Burton's two most influential movies on me came out in back-to-back years in the late 80s. That being Beetlejuice in 1988, and of course Batman in 1989. And both films are easily on my list of favorite movies of all time. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to focus on Batman, or Batman 89 as it now is affectionately called. This movie was instrumental in making the character of Batman the most important fictional character to me that has ever existed. This movie is what propelled me into becoming a lifelong fan of the character. Even as a child, I identified with its darker tone. A tone that was obviously very heavily influenced by the fresh and more modern direction artists and writers were taking in the comics of that time. Batman 89 changed the general public's perception of Batman and made it okay to take comic book characters serious again in the film medium. If not for Batman 89, we wouldn't have other highly influential interpretations of the character, such as Batman the Animated Series, or even Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy. So in essence, we owe a lot to Tim Burton for shaping the future and showing us what a comic book movie could be. Tim Burton also brought his own unique style to the film, which honestly blended perfectly with the character of Batman. And the artistic choices that he made in the film made it stand out, to the point that it now is looked at as one of the definitive Batman adaptations.
What are you? I'm Batman.
Every creative decision made by Tim Burton and his team, whether it was comic accurate or not, contributed to building his unique vision of what Batman could be. Reinterpretation can be tricky, but if you have a talented person involved who respects what came before, liberties can be taken, and they are even welcomed in that kind of circumstance. To me, Tim Burton deserves the respect of WB and comic book movie fans everywhere because he earned it. Which makes today's story all the more troubling. Tim Burton recently broke his silence on the Flash film, using both his Batman and his unrealized ideas for Superman. And let's just say his comments aren't going to help the poor reputation that Warner Brothers Pictures has established for itself even prior to this news coming out. He recently said, quote, "I think I'm over it with the studio. They can take what you did, Batman or whatever, and culturally misappropriate it. Even though you're a slave of Disney or WB, they can do whatever they want. So in my latter years of life, I'm in quiet revolt against all of this." This sounds like a brilliant creative mind that has been worn down by being involved with the Hollywood machine.
Now you want to get nuts? Come on, let's get nuts.
We're talking about a person who has had a close working relationship with the two biggest and frankly two most creatively bankrupt companies in Hollywood. Two companies that are known for taking things from the past and soullessly regurgitating them into the modern era, all in an effort to try to capitalize on them financially. From the sounds of things, Tim Burton was not consulted or even made aware that his version of Batman would be used in the Flash film.
This town needs an enema.
Now, before anyone says, well, WB owns the intellectual property, so they don't need to consult him. And yes, from a legal perspective, that is correct. But here's a question: what's the right thing to do morally? What's the right way to approach this situation that preserves the artistic integrity of what Tim Burton built? Just because WB is technically allowed to do something doesn't mean that they should do it.
Don't bother.
The fact that Tim Burton wasn't involved with the creative process in any way, or at least consulted for Michael Keaton's return to the role of Batman, is not only disrespectful, but it's downright blasphemous. But as Burton put it, once you are a part of that system, you are now a slave to that system. Because once you sign on the dotted line, your rights as a creator are all but stripped away.
Had you ever heard of the healing power of laughter?
Perhaps if Burton was involved with the Flash in some way, Keaton's return would have held a bit more weight cinematically. To me, Tim Burton's Batman is a little bit more than just a suit, a car, and a Danny Elfman score. Now, of course, all of those things are iconic and could never be replaced, and the use of them is the easiest way to incite a nostalgic reaction from audiences, but the motivations behind using this character again, and keeping the character consistent with what came before is just as important, if not more so. From the moment that Michael Keaton was kind of unceremoniously revealed in the Flash trailer, red flags were going up all over the place, and I could tell that they were using the character all wrong. Keaton's return should have been a much bigger deal than it ended up being, but his inclusion came off as nothing more than cheap nostalgia bait, and Michael Keaton's Batman deserved better after being absent from the big screen since 1992.
It's out there right now. I've got to go to work.
He should not have been used like a pawn in WB's incompetent games, paraded out in front of audiences in hopes of selling people on the idea of going to see this mess of a film. What's worse is that, similar to how Disney dropped the ball with Han, Luke, and Leia's return in Star Wars, we can't go back now. Keaton's return has now been wasted. And now there will never be another situation where audiences can feel that initial jolt of excitement seeing a character that they haven't seen in many years return to the big screen. And I do believe that all of this could have been avoided if Tim Burton was involved in some way. To me, with his involvement, Keaton's return would have meant so much more, because with Tim Burton comes his style, his working relationship with Michael Keaton, and his general understanding of who this character is. He would have done Keaton's return justice, and I have no doubt of that.
Both of you now with Batman are on the verge, I guess, of something bigger than the both of you, bigger than any project you've ever been in. Tim, is that
Can I say something? Nothing is bigger than this, man. Really.
And maybe even the Nicolas Cage Superman cameo, which again was based on Tim Burton's ideas, wouldn't have been relegated to a poorly constructed, bad CGI cameo. How fulfilling would it have been to see Tim Burton himself have a hand in realizing this vision that he never really got to complete, or even really start. Bottom line, because of how this whole situation was handled, it really feels like, yes, WB owns these characters and stories, but they do not truly understand them. They don't seem to grasp the idea that it's the creators that made these characters work, and not the studio. And without those creators, those characters cease to be what us fans fell in love with. The blatant lack of respect that WB shows for its characters, its collaborators, and its audience is exactly why the studio and the DC franchise as a whole is in the state that it's in.
Y'all be cool. Right on.